Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Transmission here on FreightWaves. My name's Sebastian Blanco. Over there is my co-host, Grace Sharkey. Grace, I believe you're not in your usual location. Where are you today? How are you doing?
I am doing really well. I am actually here in Ludington, Michigan, right next to my favorite boat and car ferry, the SS Badger, which I actually get to go interview this weekend. So it's gonna be a fun time. But yeah, I'm excited. How are you? And how's your holiday weekend gonna go?
The holiday weekend is going to be really exciting. I'm actually going to celebrate in New York, so that'll be really fun. But I know that this week was a little bit of a challenge for us here with our transmission stuff because we had a webinar planned. I had a small medical emergency. I wasn't able to make it, but I hear it went great. You handled it with aplomb.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was a really good time, and Alan and Conway have been guests on the show before, and were just absolutely phenomenal in the webinar. So I believe we'll be getting that back out there soon. So we will share that link with listeners shortly. But hopefully, if you guys missed that one, you will be at our next one with AIT as well. So yeah, it was a really good time. We missed you for sure.
Yeah, sorry about that. But that is a core to the thing we do. And speaking of AIT, before we get into today's episode,
when you switch to AIT Worldwide Logistics for automotive shipping, you're partnering with a team of logistics professionals in Asia, Europe, and North America who develop customized supply chain solutions that are just as unique as your business. Whether it's trans-border hotshot trucking, express ocean service, or an exclusive air charter, AIT has the expertise, technology, and carrier connections to achieve your production goals every time. Check out their link in the show notes.
we're very happy to have with us today Sam Abusamid, principal analyst at Guidehouse Insights. But he and I go way back. We were just talking before the show that your first time on a podcast was actually also my first time on a podcast way back in, when was that? 2007?
It was in early 2007 when we were both at Autoblog Green. You were the editor, and I was writing for you. And we our guest on that very first show was a gentleman named Martin Eberhard, who has to a lot of people has been lost to the sands of history. But he and his partner Mark Tarpening, they were the actual real co-founders of Tesla, not this Elon guy.
That's right. Right. There's a whole lawsuit that made Elon a co-founder, but Mark and Martin, they were the two main people at the very, very beginning. So yeah, Sam and I, we go way back. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and we wanted to have you today because you're just so knowledgeable. And today we're going to do a little bit of a news wrap up. A lot of times we have people on here, they've just released a paper, they just released a study or something, and we talk about that. But today there's so much going on with the EV world, with the auto supply chain. And so we just kind of want to have a little free-form discussion about it. And we're going to start actually with something you mentioned briefly, because I just came out today, which for people listening will be a couple days ago because it comes out on Tuesday. But recent news, it's all recent news, that GM just made an announcement about a partnership with a company called Controlled Thermal Resources. And they're basically working on like magic with the ocean. How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's not quite that. I mean, it actually relates to what you're talking about with supply chains and, some of the other topics we've got on the list today. One of the big challenges that, we've really come, it's really come to the fore over the last year and a half during the pandemic is supply chain resiliency. And now with so many automakers making huge plans to build, millions of EVs and convert most, if not all, of their plants over to electric vehicle production, one of the big challenges is actually getting enough batteries for those vehicles. And to build the batteries, you got to have the raw materials that go into them. One of the obviously key raw materials in a lithium-ion battery is the lithium. And so this deal that GM's doing with CTR is to produce lithium here in the United States. Most of the lithium that we get for battery production today is actually mined in either South America or Australia and processed in China and then brought here and combined with the other materials to produce the battery cells. But they, as we ramp up production of cells here in North America, we're going to need to really have as much of the raw material production localized as well as the cell production, just to save on transportation costs, save on the energy that it requires, and also to ensure that you have a resilient supply chain. You don't necessarily want to be too dependent on regions of the world that may or may not be your friends, 6 months, 5 years, 10 years from now. So this is a really interesting approach. Last fall at their battery day, Tesla talked about doing lithium processing here in the U.S., lithium mining and processing here in the U.S. In Nevada. And they talked about a process, not in much detail, but a process where they would take clay from Nevada, mix it with salt, and use that to extract the lithium from the clay and then put the clay back in the ground. What CTR is doing is something a little bit different. They're taking the geothermal brine from the geothermal fields and the Salton Sea in Southern California, and taking the brine and the steam, using the steam to drive electrical generators, with some of that energy being used for the processing, and the rest being fed back into the grid. So you got renewable energy coming out of it. And then the brine, they're extracting the lithium from the brine and injecting the brine back into the ground again. And they plan to have pilot production. They're targeting pilot production in 2024. And earlier this morning, I spoke with Tim Grew, the director of electrification strategy at GM, and he thinks, that it's possible that, later in the decade, GM could be sourcing most, if not all, of its lithium here in North America from sources like this.
And that's a big change from how it is today, as you said. The automakers having more of a role in producing their batteries is obviously something that Tesla pioneered. Volkswagen made big announcements earlier this year with some of its European so-called gigafactory plants. There was also news that Nissan is going to build a large battery plant in the UK. It's been building packs, obviously, for the Leaf for over a decade now. But do you see what Nissan's doing as sort of a bigger change from how it's been doing things before, or is it just sort of keeping up with the times, doing things the way that other automakers are doing it, or how do you see their announcement?
I'd say it's more the latter, keeping up with the times. As we're starting to finally see more real consumer demand for EVs globally, particularly in Europe. Europe has really taken off in the last year since they updated the latest emission standards there. And so as the EV demand is increasing, obviously you need more batteries, and so Nissan's ramping up. They've been producing batteries, or AESC, which was originally a joint venture of Nissan and NEC, and they sold it off to Envision, a Chinese company, a couple of years back. They've been producing batteries in Sunderland, England since 2012, I think, and also in Tennessee and in Smyrna. But so they're building a new plant that'll get them initially up to 9 gigawatt hours of cells per year. I think right now they're just under 2 gigawatt hours. But that's still tiny compared to what we've heard from other manufacturers like Volkswagen. Their announcements recently about 240 gigawatt hours of production capacity in Europe alone by the end of the decade. GM right now has 4 plants announced that are going to give them 140 gigawatt hours here in the U.S. Ford and SK made an announcement that's going to get them 60 gigawatt hours. Even Stellantis announced that they're going to have production capacity by mid-decade of 130 gigawatt hours a year in Europe and North America. So it's a step in the right direction. And I think it's probably just the first of many steps that we'll be hearing from Nissan.
That's awesome. And, I love having someone with such a well-rounded background in all areas of the industry. Over the last couple of episodes, honestly, last couple of months at this point, Sebastian, we've been really diving into the chip shortage. And I'm interested from your point of view, if you think that this is something that the auto supply chain is really going to have to focus on improving the resiliency in, whether it's, creating these chips here at home or partnering in different ways, or do you think that this shortage is just more of a one-time situation because of these unexpected hurdles that we've had whether it's the pandemic or other issues that we're seeing?
Yeah, I think that the shortage that we're experiencing is there's multiple factors. Certainly, I think it's been amplified, by the effects of the pandemic. And a lot of it started off because of decisions that were made early in the pandemic with sudden reductions in planned production of vehicles in the early part of the pandemic last year. And the expectation that the recovery in vehicle sales was going to be a lot slower. So there was a lot of cancellations of orders for chips. And because of the way the supply chain for that works, the automakers don't actually buy the chips directly. They buy electronic control units from their mostly tier one suppliers as part of other subsystems, and those suppliers buy the chips from companies like Intel and Nvidia and Qualcomm and others, who, and in most cases, aside from Intel, they actually get the chips. They design, those companies like Nvidia and Qualcomm design chips, and they have them manufactured by chip foundries like TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturer. So you got this long chain. When the automakers canceled their production orders or reduced their production orders, the cancellations cascaded down to the chip fabs like TSMC and Global Foundries, and then in turn they turned around and turn their production to producing chips for other sectors where there was a boom at the time, particularly, for PCs, computers and mobile devices that everybody needed when they were suddenly working at home and kids were at home. And, we saw a huge boom in computer sales last year. So, and then, as we started to get the recovery, suddenly there wasn't enough chips. And then we had, other factors that came in. But, ultimately a big source of the problem was that there simply aren't enough suppliers producing semiconductors. There's been too much consolidation in the industry, and a lot of it is production is localized, especially in Taiwan. And so what, as with batteries, we're starting to see moves with the automakers taking more direct control of procuring chips from suppliers and then providing them to their vendors, their tier one suppliers that are making the ECUs, and also making sure that that there's enough production locally. So we've had announcements recently from companies like Intel that they're going to build 2 new chip fabs in Arizona. TSMC themselves are going to be are building a new chip fab in Arizona as well. So we're going to see increased production because the demand for chips isn't going to go down. It's only going to go up, from all sectors.
Do you think that the work that the federal government is doing, and that these both chip makers and sort of the relationships they have with other companies, is that enough right now, or is this chip shortage going to be? I mean, we hear that it's kind of lessening now. We kind of either at the peak or we're about to peak with the problem, or maybe just past it, depending on who you talk to. I think we'll still be feeling things throughout the third quarter as far as production numbers go. But do you see the big effect of this chip shortage basically being done, and then the new factories that are coming online really happening as demand is increasing, or are we still going to feel a pinch for a while down the road?
I think we're still going to feel a pinch for probably at least into 2022. I think we may be hitting, maybe nearing the bottom or, the worst of the problem right now, but I think it's still going to be a little while before we're really fully recovered. And, the other thing to keep in mind is that, while the government wants to incentivize building new chip fabs here in the U.S., it takes about 3 to 4 years to build a chip fab. This is not something that, even if you throw money at it today, you're not going to have new chips being manufactured here 6 months from now. We're talking, 2024, 2025 before these new factories come online. And so, we're still going to have to deal with the issues until then. And one of the other things that automakers are doing right now is they are, a lot of the chips that they traditionally use in automotive tend to be older generation chips. They're built on what we call larger process nodes, and because they're inexpensive, but they've also been optimized to be to essentially be hardened. Because one of the challenges in the automotive environment or in a vehicle environment is electromagnetic interference. because you've got so many computers, you've got so much going on in there, so much electronics in there that these things can actually interfere with each other. And so you can't just take a PC chip and drop it into a car and expect it to work reliably, in all the different conditions that a vehicle operates in. So they're working now on updating a lot of their ECUs to try to use newer generation chips that are more available. And that will help help get through this interim period. But even that, takes a lot of time and resources to do.
So what I really actually love your opinion on as well, you brought up Tesla a little bit earlier, is I believe it was last week came out that Panasonic had actually recently sold a stake in Tesla to likely fund a big portion of the Blue Yonder deal, which I actually wrote about a little bit here at FreightWaves, just really talking about how Blue Yonder would really help Panasonic in a lot of really diversifying its book between hardware and software for logistics as a whole. But I'm interested in your opinion on the working relationship between Tesla and Panasonic, and really just your thoughts on that overall sale as well.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the sale goes, Panasonic acquired their shares in Tesla back around the time of the IPO, I believe, back in 2010 or 2011. And so, they bought those shares at a very low price. And, earlier this year, as Tesla's share price was peaking somewhere around $900, I don't know exactly at what point Panasonic actually sold the shares, but sometime late last year, earlier this year, as the price was spiking, I think they decided to take that was probably a good opportunity to take their profits and reallocate those resources, because they had things that they wanted to do, like this Blue Yonder acquisition, and I'm sure there's other things. So they basically just reallocating some of those resources, and that was a huge gain that they made on those. And it might be a while before it gets back to that point again. So I think that's why they chose this particular time. Excuse me. But I think Panasonic's relationship with Tesla has been challenging over the years, especially for Panasonic. At various times over the last several years, when Tesla has been struggling to try to hit profitability, they have gone to their various suppliers, and basically, demanded price cuts on the parts that they were buying. And as Tesla's single largest outside supplier, Panasonic took the brunt of that. For several years, they were experiencing some pretty significant losses in their battery business, in large part because of the discounts they were giving to Tesla. And the thing that most people probably aren't aware of is, the Tesla factory in Nevada, where they make battery cells. Tesla owns the building, and they own a bunch of equipment in there that they use for assembling battery packs and motors, but they don't actually own any of the cell production equipment in that building. That all belongs to Panasonic, and that's the most valuable stuff in that building. So that's actually Panasonic is just renting floor space from Tesla, and they own all the cell production equipment. And there's been speculation that Panasonic was reluctant to invest more in production for Tesla because of the challenges they've had with how much they were actually getting paid for those cells. But they've stuck with it. Now Panasonic is indicating that they'd like to continue working with Tesla, and they're looking at investing in production equipment for the new 4680 cells. But Tesla is also now working with other cell suppliers as well, particularly mostly in China, where they're getting cells from CATL and LG Chem for their Chinese produced vehicles. And it's not clear, for the cell production facilities that Tesla wants to add at their Austin and Brandenburg assembly plants in Germany, whether Panasonic's going to be a part of that or not. So we'll have to wait and see on that.
We've got about 5 minutes left here for this last question, which I think will take up a lot of time because it's such a broad question. But you're talking about, so when Tesla started up, they needed to sort of form new relationships. a lot of automakers have had a lot of their, relationships with Conti or, Delphi or whoever for ages. But now that more startups are coming, focusing on electric vehicles, as well as the traditional OEMs shifting over to electric vehicles, someone who supplies an 8-speed transmission has got to be looking at it and saying, I might not be that useful in the next, after the next decade or so. Can you just talk a little bit in broad terms and drill down into detail as much as you want, as far as how EVs are affecting the auto supply chain? I mean, whether it's different parts coming into vehicles, whether it's old parts that aren't being used as much. That's kind of the overarching theme of this show. I would love to just get your take on that big question as far as the automotive supplier landscape and the relationship between the companies now that we have more and more EVs coming.
Yeah, I would say, the big thing that's happening, and this is both at the OEM level and at the supplier level, is that everyone has been slashing their investments in anything related to internal combustion engines. So that means the engines themselves, transmissions, driveline equipment. And, in many cases, we've seen suppliers actually divesting themselves of the parts of the business that focus on that. So a few years ago, we saw Delphi split itself up into two companies, Aptiv, that focused on automated driving, ADAS, and electrical architecture, and Delphi Technologies, which was all the powertrain related businesses. That company, Delphi Technologies, was then acquired by Borg Warner, another company that's primarily been in the powertrain business. But as Borg Warner has been beefing up its electric motor business and some of the other things with their acquisition of Remy, they're now combining their their engine parts of their business with what they got from Delphi Technologies, and they want to start divesting some of that. We've seen GM and Ford and other automakers slash the number of engineers they have working on engines and transmissions to refocus on electric motor and battery and power electronics development. So across the industry, we've seen this shift, and it's a matter of they know that there isn't a future with internal combustion engines, so they're just not going to put any more than the minimal amount of money they need. It's basically sustaining that business until the transition happens. But you're probably not going to see any major new developments coming out, in the engine side. And even companies like ZF that has long been focused on transmissions. They have turned their attention more. They acquired TRW a few years ago for their ADAS, their driver assistance technologies, and also their electrification expertise. And they've been beefing up their electrification business. ZF is a major supplier of automatic transmissions. Their 8-speed automatics are used by many automakers, but now they're focusing on a version of that has an integrated electric motor for hybrid and plug-in hybrid applications. That's what Stellantis is using in their Jeeps now, and the Wrangler and the upcoming Grand Cherokee and Wagoneer, and other manufacturers are using variations of that same system. So everybody has been making this shift to divesting where they can, or scaling back investments in anything ICE related, and putting it all into developments in motors, power electronics, batteries, automated driving, driver assist, anything that doesn't burn fuel.
Right. Well, that's definitely the way things are going, and it's always fascinating to catch up with you and get your take on these things. Thank you again. Sam Abdul-Samid is a principal analyst at Guidehouse Insights. And Sam, where else can people find you? I know you're all over the internet as far as your own show and other places, but go ahead and tell people where they can track you down if they haven't already.
Yeah, I co-host the Wheel Bearings podcast with my friends Roberto Baldwin and Nicole Wakelin at wheelbearings.media. You can find some stuff that I write on Forbes. I'm also on Leo Laporte's Tech Guy radio show every Sunday afternoon, doing a car tech segment. So just Google my name. You can find me around.
And for Transmission this week, I'm Sebastian Blanco. There's Grace Sharkley, and there's Sam Abdul-Samid. Thank you so much, everyone.